It's time for us to once again delve into the world of survival horror. This will be my final video covering the original release of Resident Evil. Today I'm going over the actual balancing and gameplay elements. I'll be describing each aspect of it and laying down a bit of critique. There's much to love, but there's also some spots where a bit of polish would have been nice. So, without further ado, we'll jump right into the gun-totin', zombie-stompin', crow-shootin' good time that is Resident Evil 1. I think the biggest aspect to cover is, of course, the tank control setup. I've heard so many people complain about Biohazard's tank controls. I swear to God, if I hear one more person whine about this, I'm going to eat a baby. Half of the reviews I find for this game give some sort of disclaimer for itself with the statement, "I know the controls have aged badly." The tank controls here operate perfectly fine and are not that hard to get acclimated to. Most people are just too lazy to play the game for more than 30 minutes and get used to them. If you're playing a modern third-person shooter for the first time, you're gonna have to get acclimated to those controls as well. If you really struggle with the controls that badly, get the DualShock Edition. The controls being formatted how they are doesn't make the game bad, it's just a skill issue on your part. There are two primary reasons as to why the controls are set up in the way they are: the fixed camera perspectives and the PS1's control limitations. The DualShock controller, you know, the one with the analog sticks, didn't come out till 1997. RE1 came out in 1996, so I'm sure you can guess why the controls had to be specifically designed for the D-pad. Along with this, tank controls fit best with the fixed camera perspectives, and they're very easy to understand. If you're running through a hallway that has a fixed perspective and you're using a more modern control scheme, then as soon as the camera perspective changes, then the direction you're going might change as well. This makes the player unnecessarily frustrated and adds a whole new layer of jank. You can see this with the early Devil May Cry games. Sometimes the camera perspective will get in your way. Here, you press up to go forward, down to go back, and the other two directions will turn the player. This is quite useful alongside the fixed camera. The up button will always make the player go forward relative to the character model. The down button will make them go back, and so on. This level of certainty makes it easier to quickly traverse the mansion without accidentally changing direction once the camera direction changes. Heck, you can even turn while moving forward or backward. The only real issue I have with the controls is that instead of having a quick turn, you either have to slowly move backwards, or try to spin your character model around and run the other direction before the enemy grabs your ass cheeks. This is very minor and doesn't affect gameplay enough to be a huge problem. While on the subject of camera perspectives, this is a great opportunity to talk about how that influences the game's fear factor. Since you're going to be traversing the Spencer mansion with fixed cameras, this allows for the setup of more effective scares. For example, when you're first introduced to the Cerberus enemy type, as you run through the halls, the dogs jump through the window just inches from the camera. This will immediately send the player into panic mode. This applies to enemy placement as well. The zombie enemies in specific being placed how they are keeps the player on their toes. You never want to get too comfortable lest you be clapped up by a random zombie. The tension is allowed to grow by the layout of the mansion. Its design is very labyrinthian in nature. This plays into the fear factor, intensifying the experience. But it also contributes to the overarching puzzle that the game has laid out for you when running through the Arclay facility. The mansion and laboratory are designed in the same vein as games like Metroid and Dark Souls. I'd actually argue that Resident Evil 1 is one of the first Metroidvania games in 3D. The entire game is designed around the idea of non-linearity. The various keys, emblems, and medallions are used to unlock secret passageways. Entire sections of the mansion and the underground labs are completely blocked off until you find a key item and use it to progress. This is done in such a masterful way that it rarely feels like tedium. And let me tell you, I have the attention span of a 5-year-old on crack, so if it doesn't feel tedious to me, then you know we've got something good going on. But let me elaborate further. It doesn't really feel tedious because Biohazard gives you a trail of breadcrumbs to work with and leads you to where you need to go. The game drip feeds you just enough stuff to keep you motivated to continue. The buildup of key items, ammo if you're able to properly conserve it, and the buildup of knowledge makes playing the game more rewarding over time, especially on repeat playthroughs. The only real critique I have in this regard is that sometimes the layout can seem a bit harebrained and nonsensical. Like, there won't be a lot of rhyme or reason to some of these places you go to, but that can all be chalked up to the fact that it was designed by an insane guy, so definitely not a normal mansion. I've been speaking quite generally about the gameplay and game design, but let's get into some specifics, starting with the various differences between Chris and Jill's campaigns. I've said in earlier videos that the difference between the two comes down to a difficulty setting, and while this is mostly true, there are some ways in which it can be pretty subjective. A lot of the time it's boiled down to what you personally consider to be harder. Chris's run gives you a larger health pool and makes you faster than Jill, but Chris gets the shotgun much later than Jill due to the hoops you have to go through to get it. This means you're not able to put out as much damage and you're going to do a lot more searching. Jill has more inventory space and gets a lockpick at the start of the game. This means you'll have a lot easier of a time with inventory management and getting through the mansion as Jill. The reason why I personally believe that Jill's run is easier is due to a few factors. Inventory management and the puzzles are some of the biggest aspects of the game in my opinion. While Chris's health pool is larger, that will only get you so far if you don't know what you're doing and you're not proficient at dodging enemies. Not to mention managing your bullets enough to kill the ones that are necessary. The management of ammo is also made harder by the fact that you've got less inventory slots, so you'll either be picking up less ammo or you'll have to sacrifice other items. This is what I think makes Chris's campaign so hard. The lack of a lockpick will also make things take a bit longer due to your having to search for stuff as well. His inventory being so small is the largest factor here though. Imagine you're trying to get around the mansion as a new player, and since you have less inventory spots, you realize that you need to pick up a key item. But since you only have 6 slots and no space in your inventory whatsoever, you have to go back to one of your save chests and hope you don't die on the way. But if you're newer to the game, that's going to be a problem, so you can either try to finagle the zombie and dodge it, and then you'll risk some bites, or you can shoot the enemy and you still might potentially risk getting a zombie hickey. At this point you're down on ammo, maybe health as well, and you have to get to the chest. Then you have to figure out what items you can manage getting rid of at the moment, and then make your way back to where the key item is and pick it up. Do you see how this can potentially be a little frustrating when you're a newer player? As you increase in skill, that gap in difficulty will close to a substantial degree. But I think it's important to factor in all skill levels when determining how difficult something is. If you're some god of survival horror, then of course it'll be a lot easier. Praise our Lord and Savior, the survival horror king and whatnot. But if you're going in blind, not knowing where any of the items are, not remembering enemy placement off the noggin, and not being aware of what doors lead where, you're going to have a much more difficult time playing as Chris. At least, that's what I think. Like I said, this is kind of subjective. Let's go a little more in depth on the combat. In the beginning of the game, you get a knife and a pistol. Chris gets his gun shortly after finding Kenneth being nom-nommed, but basically the beginning of the game. So the knife is very short-ranged, and the handgun is definitely longer ranged, but barely deals out any damage. Sometimes it can take like 6 bullets just to take down your average zombie in this game. Side note, the sound effect for the pistol is very underwhelming. A lot of the gun sound effects in this game are kinda meh, and I wish they did a better job with the sound design, but what can you do? The sheer tankiness of these zombies really discourages you from going into fights unless you absolutely have to. You're gonna lose a good amount of bullets, and you're gonna potentially lose a lot of health. When zombies grab you, they can bite you up to 3 times. I've found that if you just mash all the trigger buttons fast enough, you can get this down to 1 or 2 bites. Haven't gotten it down to a science yet, I just know button slam good. You're very likely to get bit while trying to knife enemies unless you're just God's gift to man. It's almost completely impossible when trying to kill dogs or hunters with a knife. You're better off just using a shotgun or a pistol for those guys, depending on how much ammo you have left. How do you get a shotgun, you may ask? That's a good question. Jill just walks into a room, nearly gets crushed to death, gets saved by Barry, then gets a shotgun. Chris doesn't get the shotgun until he finds an old broken one and puts it in the spot where you pick up the good shotgun. This prevents you from triggering the trap. I suppose that's because Barry wasn't there to prevent him from becoming a Chris sandwich. The shotgun is a very useful tool, and in the end game, you're going to be using it a lot. You're definitely going to want to pick up any shotgun rounds whenever you can. When swarmed by multiple enemies, you can use it for a little crowd control. It's great on stronger enemies like hunters, and if you aim upwards while a zombie is close to you, their head will just explode in a single shot. So if done right, you can get one-hit kills with a headshot. I wouldn't suggest doing that too often though, because shotgun ammo can be kind of scarce in certain areas of the game. We also have the Magnum that appears in almost every RE game. It's some type of cult python, I'm pretty sure. This boy deals out massive damage. If you want to show everyone that you have a big PP, then you need to be rocking the Magnum. You'll be the most rootin' tootin' gunslinger in the entire mansion. If you can find ammo for it, that is. The crazy thing is, ammo is so scarce that you might just not use the gun. I ended up just throwing it in my chest and never touching it again on my first playthrough. In my second one, I got drunk on the power of the Holy Magnum, then I ran out of ammo and got turned into lunch by a hunter. You get 30 Magnum rounds in the entire game? I didn't count, but I'm pretty sure that's a generally accurate number. Close to the end game, Chris can pick up a flamethrower, and it's somewhat useful. It's very situational. You don't get a lot of ammo for it, seeing a pattern here, and it's mainly used when you need to output a lot of damage at a close range with a lot of enemies nearby. Oh, and it's also good for spiders. Then we have the bazooka, or grenade launcher, not sure what it is, but it's
really powerful, especially against living things. Better take it with you.
Of course, if we're using weapons, this implies that there are things to use the weapons on. So let's go over the enemy types. We of course have the standard zombies. They'll bite you, and then sometimes they'll vomit all over you and melt you to death. These guys go down with usually 4 or 5, maybe 6 handgun rounds, so they're manageable. You can also kill them with the knife if you're Lord Jesus himself and you have the ankles of LeBron James. The second enemy we're introduced to is Cerberus. They're a bunch of stinky dogs that run at Mach 2 and will bite your balls if you're not careful. These bastards jump around like crackheads and you will lose so much ammo trying to hit these guys. Then we have the crows, and you can get away from these guys at a brisk walk. They're not that dangerous, you don't even need to kill them. But if you really want to, you can hit them with 1 to 2 bullets and they'll go down pretty easy. At some point, the hunters are introduced, and they're genetically engineered to completely destroy you. They take so many rounds to take down. Your best bet is to either run or hit them with some of the more potent stuff you have. Otherwise, you're going to have a really bad time. Same with the chimeras. From there, we just have spiders, sharks, and bees, Wesker's worst enemy.
Wesker!
Legend has it, he's still shooting at those bees to this day. There aren't a ton of boss fights. You gotta fight Plant 42, as Jill you don't have to. Then Yawn, you fight him twice, the giant black tiger spider, and then you get to deal with Tyrant. This is the only time you get to use a rocket launcher in the entire game. Tyrant can be a tad difficult at times depending on your skill level. You're going to be doing a lot of running and repositioning in order to get a good shot on him, but as long as you keep moving, you should be perfectly fine. I don't have many notes about the other bosses besides the fact that Yawn the Snake is absolutely broken. He just surrounds you, and there's not much you can do about it besides just outputting as much damage as possible within the shortest amount of time. You're gonna want enough heals to bring a horse back from the dead for this fight. I swear to God, this asshole sucks so much. Now let's talk about the puzzles. Most of these puzzles are fun, but simple. They generally consist of placing items in the correct spots in a room so you don't die, forcing you to think more than 5 seconds about touching stuff when you enter a room. What's that? You see a button on the floor? Well, don't press it or you'll die. I did that once in a room where there was little armor statues, and I didn't save a ton before that point, so I was super paranoid to do anything in any room without giving it a good think for at least 2 minutes.
I used to be an adventurer like you, and I took an arrow in the knee.
These puzzles are a pretty nice change of pace though from all the combat going on. Speaking of saving, Biohazard has a pretty unique save system. You gotta use these ink ribbons around the mansion to save your progress. This requires you to even think about saving and what it entails, adding to the tension while you're trying to progress. You're limited in the amount of times you can save, and you can only save at a few select spots. Sometimes you'll go an entire hour without saving, and you'll be on the edge the entire time because of it. Resident Evil 1, gameplay-wise, masterfully instills suspense in the player. The fear you'll feel on your first playthrough will be like none other. Then, on repeat playthroughs, that tension will still be there, but you can focus more on mastering the mechanics and getting alternative endings. Not only does it succeed as a horror game, but RE1 has a ton of replay value. Again, I'm pretty sure I say it in every episode of this series, but there's just so much to love about this title. I'll be releasing a video about Resident Evil's HD remake in a couple weeks or so. So if you enjoy this video and you'd like to see more, then like, comment, ring that notification bell, and drop a sub. There's so much more Resident Evil content that I'd like to talk about and delve into, so stay tuned. Until I see you again, stay alive, stay safe, stay human.